Russia is facing the most critical period in its history. Factories have emptied, production has stopped, the civilian economy has entered complete collapse. Yet the only question on the minds of the Kremlin and its top leadership is how to sustain the war despite enormous losses. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council and one of Putin's most loyal figures, has proposed a very bold plan on this issue. You may remember Medvedev from his threats to target the West with nuclear weapons. His name has rarely left the headlines, but now Medvedev has turned his attention to his own people. Speaking at a meeting on personnel recruitment for unmanned systems units, Medvedev announced that the military recruitment target set by the commander-in-chief has been fully met. According to finalized data, a total of 422,704 people enlisted in the military on a contract basis in 2025. In addition, 32,000 people joined volunteer units. On paper, these figures might suggest that the Russian war machine is running smoothly. However, a closer look immediately reveals the decline and panic behind them. In 2024, the figure was around 450,000. The prolongation of the war shows that the initial excitement in Russian society has given way to deep fatigue and fear. Medvedev's statement is less a success story and more an announcement of a replacement operation. Imagine a pool. Every year, over 400,000 new soldiers enter the system, but the water level never rises and sometimes even drops. This defies the laws of physics until you realize there is a huge hole at the bottom. This is the reality of the Russian army today. Medvedev said nothing about what happened to the roughly 450,000 people recruited in 2024, but the truth could not stay hidden. Yuri Podolyak, one of Russia's most influential pro-war military bloggers with nearly 3 million followers and often seen as the Kremlin's unofficial spokesperson, broke the country's biggest taboo. According to his calculations, approximately 2 million people have passed through the Russian army since the war began. Initial forces, the 2022 mobilization, and roughly 450,000 contract soldiers joining each year. Today, the army on the ground numbers only around 900,000. The question of where the more than 1 million people in between have gone has become Russia's greatest taboo. Podolyak's analysis shows total losses exceeding 820,000, with approximately 400,000 of those being direct fatalities. In military terms, this is called consumption, not sustainability. The Russian army is expending its human resources like ammunition, and this rate has long exceeded what Russian society can bear. At this point, psychological collapse on the front lines comes into play. Images on social media show that the disciplinary methods used by the Russian army on its own soldiers recall the Middle Ages. In one video, a Russian soldier is stripped naked, tied to a tree, and left in freezing cold. These methods are concrete evidence that the army is rotting from within. This inhumane treatment and fear of death have triggered a massive wave of desertions. In 2025 alone, more than 10,000 desertions were recorded. Since the war began, the number is estimated to approach 100,000. Soldiers prefer hiding in forests, fleeing with fake identities, or surrendering rather than becoming targets for Ukrainian drones or artillery. Documents leaked from the 41st Army confirm thousands of desertions in a single unit. The Kremlin is responding by raising desertion penalties to 10 years and deploying military police to hunt its own soldiers.
The pressure is not only on deserters, but also on those who refuse to sign contracts. Behind the numbers presented as voluntary participation lies significant coercion. In videos, soldiers say, "The commanders threaten us, saying, 'If you don't join, you'll be punished. If you refuse, you'll be imprisoned or sent to the front. They leave us no choice. We have to sign the contract.'" The situation has reached the point where some frontline units are experiencing mass rebellions and insubordination. The collective transfer request of officers of the 39th Brigade and unrest on the Pokrovsk front show that soldiers have reached the mindset, "We are only here to die." Medvedev's dazzling figure of 422,000 is a patch thrown over this bleeding wound, but the patch isn't sticking. Because the patch isn't sticking, Putin has turned his fights beyond Russia's borders. With its own population dwindling, Russia has begun importing the war. Today, North Korean soldiers, African mercenaries, and Nepalese volunteers appear on Russian front lines. The Kremlin is outsourcing death to reduce the social backlash from news of its own citizens' deaths. But even outsourcing the war cannot hide the economic collapse. Adding 422,000 more people to the army means sudden cardiac arrest for the Russian economy. These people are not falling from the sky, they are being torn from factories, fields, and offices, from the wheels of production. Russia is struggling with a massive labor shortage of 4.8 million people. The unemployment rate at a historic low of 2.6% is not an economic success, but a dramatic sign that no one is left to work. Construction is at a standstill. Logistics chains are breaking. The IT sector is bleeding out due to brain drain. As war costs grow uncontrollably, Kremlin revenues shrink at the same pace. Even the Russian Ministry of Finance's embellished data cannot hide a budget deficit of $52 billion in the first 10 months of 2025. Independent economists predict it will exceed $70 billion by the end of 2026. Oil and gas revenues have fallen 34% due to sanctions and global price declines. Putin is burning through the National Welfare Fund, Russia's rainy day fund, to finance the war. 60% of its liquid assets have evaporated, leaving only hard-to-sell gold and Chinese yuan. The diversion of labor and capital to military production is eating away at industries that keep modern society functioning. Non-defense companies are reverting to 4-day work weeks to survive. Wage defaults are rising as banks prioritize military contracts. Layoffs increase in non-war sectors. This is what happens when you spend 7 to 8% of GDP on an endless war. The civilian sector doesn't collapse overnight. It slowly stops working one unpaid salary at a time. This has created a strange and terrifying death economy in Russian society. In poor regions, a man is promised 10 times his factory wage to go to the front. In places like Mary L., 10% of the regional budget goes solely to recruiting men. If he dies, the family compensation is a fortune they could never otherwise see. The state offers death, not life, as the most profitable option. Even these payments are faltering. Missing in action status has become a Kremlin trick to avoid compensation. No payment if no body is found. This protects the budget and keeps official death tolls low.
The longest-term and deadliest consequence is demographic. Russia is seeing its lowest birth rates since World War II. By 2025, the fertility rate has fallen to 1.24 children per woman. A nation needs at least 2.1 to renew itself. Russian women are refusing motherhood due to uncertainty, economic crisis, and fear of raising children for war. Surveys show 60% have postponed or canceled plans to have children because of the war. Russia's demographics, already weakened by the 1990s collapse, entered national extinction with Putin's war. The deaths of 400,000 young men, crippling of hundreds of thousands more, and flight of over 1 million educated young people abroad have torn an irreparable hole in the gene pool. Projections for 2026 show an annual population decline of more than 600,000, a large city disappearing from the map every year. While Putin seeks Ukrainian territory, he is losing the Russian population needed to hold and work it. History proves land can be reclaimed, but a lost generation cannot. For the average Russian, life feels like a dystopian novel. At the market, real inflation exceeds 20%. Butter prices skyrocket. Eggs become a luxury in border regions like Belgorod. People endure winters without electricity, water, or heating due to Ukrainian attacks. The belief that the state protects us has given way to the reality that it exploits us. Urban silence is not consent, but fear and helplessness. People see that while they cannot pay bills, the government spends $800 million a day bombing Ukrainian cities. Diplomatically, the world is shrinking for Russia, not just divided into friends and enemies. Western sanctions grow more targeted and sophisticated. The EU and UK increase pressure via lower oil price caps in targeting shadow fleets. Delayed but stark U.S. sanctions on Rosneft in Lukoil remind Moscow that American financial power can reactivate with devastating effect. Deeper pressure comes from Russia's lifeline, its partnership with China. This is not an alliance of equals, but a patron-client relationship. Beijing buys Russian oil and gas at deep discounts, seizes rents once flowing to Russia by selling manufactured goods, and turns Russia into a captive market. Unlimited friendship has clear limits. It will not jeopardize China's far more critical ties with the West. Projects like Power of Siberia 2 are on hold because China avoids risking secondary sanctions. This creates an unbearable paradox for the Kremlin. To continue the war, it must bow increasingly to Beijing, sacrificing long-term sovereignty and autonomy, yet still without the decisive support it craves. Russia is a minor partner in its own defining conflict. China's interest lies not in quick Russian victory, but in a long, exhausting war that weakens both Moscow and the West. Every ruble converted to yuan, every discounted barrel sold, deepens dependence. The pivot to the east is not strategic victory, it is managing strategic collapse. Russia advances today within a triple vice: economic, military, and diplomatic, that not only presses but feeds on itself, narrowing room for maneuver. Economically, the system overheats. Short-term war-driven growth is inefficient and unsustainable. Chronic inflation and high interest rates stifle demand. The Kremlin faces a dilemma: strain the budget further for war or ease civilian pressure and slow the front, both costly. Militarily, Russia relies on quantity over quality. Production rises, but at the expense of modernization and high-tech components, now dependent on China with political strings. Diplomatically, Russia is isolated and asymmetrical even in remaining ties. Sanctions evolve into a learning, targeted attrition mechanism. The grand vision behind Kremlin walls shatters against a lost generation.